Born in the rugged hills of eastern Kentucky, William Preston Taulbee climbed from preacher to politician, his voice carrying the hopes of his Appalachian folks all the way to Congress. But his rise weren't without trouble, and a bitter feud with a sharp-tongued journalist ended in bloodshed on the marble stairs of the Capitol. Pull up a chair, and I'll tell you the tale of faith, ambition, and a tragedy that still echoes through history. Howdy, y'all, and welcome back to Kentucky Melody. We're so glad to have you here as we uncover the beauty, mystery, and history of the Bluegrass State. If you're new around these parts, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. It helps us keep bringing you the stories that make Kentucky so unforgettable. And to all our loyal viewers, welcome back. Your support means the world to us. We're thrilled to introduce our brand new podcast playlist, Kentucky Time Capsule. This series dives deep into the rich history of our state, uncovering the tales of grit, glory, and heartbreak that shaped Kentucky into what it is today. From legendary figures and infamous feuds to moments that changed the course of history, we're bringing the past to life one story at a time. So settle in, and let's open up the Kentucky Time Capsule together. Who knows what treasures we'll find? In the rugged hills of eastern Kentucky, where life was carved out of the land with grit, faith, and resilience, William Preston Taulbee rose from humble beginnings to become a voice for his Appalachian kinfolk. Born into a world where church bells and the crack of a blacksmith's hammer set the rhythm of life, Taulbee's journey took him from the pulpit to the halls of Congress, his eloquence and charisma carrying him far beyond the hollers he called home. But his climb to prominence was cut tragically short by a fateful encounter with a Louisville reporter, forever tying his legacy to one of the most shocking acts of violence in Capitol history. William Preston Taulbee came into this world on October 22, 1851, in the quiet countryside near Mount Sterling in Morgan County, Kentucky. His parents, William Harrison Taulbee and Mary Ann Wilson, were rooted deep in the Appalachian way of life, where faith and family were as strong as the oak trees in the hills. Raised in modest circumstances, young William grew up with a sense of purpose, shaped by the rugged land and tight-knit community that surrounded him. His father, a Methodist minister, wasn't just the spiritual guide of the family. He was also William's first teacher. Under his father's watchful eye, the boy learned not only his letters and numbers, but the values of hard work, humility, and faith. Much of Taulbee's early education came at home, but he also attended the local common schools, where he soaked up what knowledge he could. He wasn't just a quick learner. He was a natural speaker, able to hold folks' attention with his words even as a young man. By the time he reached his late teens, it was clear to everyone around him that William was destined for something bigger. He felt the calling of the church and answered it with his whole heart. Taulbee became an ordained minister in the Methodist Episcopal Church South, dedicating his life to serving small, isolated congregations scattered across eastern Kentucky. These weren't easy assignments. Many of the churches were little more than wooden shacks perched on hillsides, and the congregations were made up of folks who worked the land from sunup to sundown. But Taulbee's passion for preaching shone bright. His sermons, delivered with a charisma that seemed to lift the very rafters, earned him the love and respect of his community. He wasn't just a preacher. He was a friend, a guide, and a source of hope in hard times. In 1878, looking to make an even bigger difference, Taulbee stepped into public service as the clerk of the Magoffin County Court. The role suited him, but it also sparked a new interest: law, Between his duties as clerk, he pored over legal books, teaching himself the ins and outs of the law. By 1881, his hard work paid off, and he passed the bar, becoming a lawyer. His intelligence, work ethic, and unshakable faith made him stand out in Kentucky's Democratic circles. Folks trusted him, not just as a lawyer or a politician, but as a man of integrity who understood the struggles of Appalachian people. By the time he decided to run for Congress, Taulbee was already a well-loved figure, both in his home county and beyond. His rise wasn't just a personal triumph, it was a symbol of what could be achieved through determination and faith, even in the face of adversity. Little did anyone know, though, that his remarkable journey would end in heartbreak and tragedy, leaving a legacy that still echoes through Kentucky's hills and the history books alike. Charles E. Kincade was born around 1855 in Kentucky, though the details of his early life remain a bit hazy compared to the well-documented history of William Preston Taulbee. What little we do know paints a picture of a young man who grew up in a more urban setting, far removed from the rugged Appalachian hills that shaped Taulbee's upbringing. It was here, in the bustle of city life, that Kincaid first discovered his gift for words. From an early age, he showed a sharp intellect and a knack for writing, qualities that would set him on a path toward a promising career in journalism. Kincaid's physical frailty was one of the most striking aspects of his character. Described as slight and weak, he wasn't the kind to impose himself with stature or strength. Instead, he relied on his wit, his clever turn of phrase, and the pointed edge of his pen to make his presence felt. In a world where power was often measured by brute force, Kincade carved out his own kind of influence through the written word. In his early career, he worked for various newspapers where his political reporting quickly earned him a reputation. His keen analysis and sharp observations drew attention, making him a respected voice in political circles. By the 1880s, Kincade had risen to a prestigious position as a Washington correspondent for the Louisville Times. This role placed him right at the heart of the nation's political action, giving him a front-row seat to the power plays and scandals that defined the era. Kincaid's slight frame and fragile health often set him apart in the rough-and-tumble world of Washington politics, but he didn't let that hold him back. His pen became his weapon, and his words carried weight, earning both admiration and fear from those in power. While he may not have had the physical presence to dominate a room, his intellect and tenacity ensured that he was never overlooked in the political scene he chronicled so keenly. In 1884, Taulbee, often called the Mountain Orator or the Kentucky Gentleman, was elected to the U.S. House of Representatives, representing Kentucky's 10th Congressional District. Standing tall with a commanding presence, Taulbee quickly established himself as a rising star in the Democratic Party. His eloquence, honed in Appalachian pulpits, became his most powerful tool, allowing him to advocate passionately for his constituents in the rugged hills and hollers of eastern Kentucky. Taulbee focused his efforts on the issues that mattered most to the people back home. He championed infrastructure improvements, pushing for better roads and railways to connect his remote district to the broader world. He also fought for economic development, working to bring opportunities to the rural communities he so deeply understood. But his ambitions didn't come without challenges. As he climbed higher in Washington's political ranks, Taulbee sought out powerful allies, which sometimes meant making a few enemies along the way. Behind the scenes, however, Taulbee's life began to show cracks. His reputation as the Mountain Orator was shadowed by personal troubles that couldn't be ignored. Whispers of alleged improprieties began circulating, including a rumored affair with a young woman employed at the patent office. Though unproven, these allegations stirred gossip in Washington and would later become a central issue in his heated feud with Charles E. Kincaid. As the pressures of public life mounted, Taulbee's story took a darker turn, setting the stage for the events that would ultimately cement his place in history. In 1887, Charles E. Kincade wrote a series of damning articles for the Louisville Times that would forever change William Preston Taulbee's life and legacy. The most infamous of these was titled "A Scandal in the Halls of Congress," in which Kincade accused Taulbee of leveraging his position for personal gain and pointed to rumors of an alleged affair with a young woman employed at the patent office. Adding to the controversy, Kincade followed up with pieces such as The Double Life of Congressman Taulbee and Kentucky's Silver-Tongued Orator tied to scandal, the latter using Taulbee's admired nickname to highlight the disparity between his public persona and the accusations of impropriety. These articles shook the foundations of Taulbee's career. The charges, though unproven, were enough to erode the trust of his constituents and tarnish the reputation of a man once celebrated as a rising star in Congress. By 1888, overwhelmed by the relentless scrutiny and political fallout, Taulbee chose not to seek re-election, marking the beginning of his decline from public life. For Taulbee, the articles were far more than journalistic critique. They were a personal attack. The use of his nickname and Kentucky's Silver-Tongued Orator tied to scandal particularly stung as it turned a symbol of his eloquence and charm into a mark of hypocrisy. Taulbee blamed Kincade directly for his fall from grace, viewing the journalist as a calculated antagonist. The growing animosity between the two men set the stage for a feud that would escalate into violence, ultimately etching their names into one of the most shocking chapters in Capitol history. The bad blood between William Preston Taulbee and Charles E. Kincade didn't cool none after Taulbee left Congress. Instead, it seemed to simmer, growing hotter every time their paths crossed. Taulbee stayed in Washington, working as a lobbyist, and in them political circles, it wasn't unusual for the two men to run into each other. But those encounters were far from civil. Folks say Taulbee, a tall and physically intimidating man, took to bullying Kincade, using his size and presence to humiliate the smaller journalist at every opportunity. Witnesses spoke of Taulbee's behavior with a mix of shock and unease. On more than one occasion, they saw him grab Kincade by the ear like a schoolmaster scolding a child, his grip leaving Kincade red-faced and humiliated. Other times, he'd shove Kincade against a wall, leaning in close with words sharp enough to cut. In public, Taulbee mocked him openly, calling him names and making sure everyone within earshot heard his ridicule. To many, it seemed like Taulbee was trying to break Kincaid's spirit, but the journalist wasn't one to fold so easily. Kincade, frail and slight, didn't have the physical strength to stand up to a man like Taulbee, but he carried something that leveled the playing field, a small .32 caliber pistol. Some reckon he kept it out of fear, a way to protect himself if Taulbee ever pushed too far. Whatever the reason, that pistol would become central to the tragedy that followed. The tension between the two finally boiled over on February 28, 1890. That day, the two men crossed paths on the east staircase of the U.S. Capitol, a place echoing with history and now destined to bear witness to violence. Accounts from witnesses say Taulbee started the confrontation, taunting Kincade with the same cruel jabs and insults he'd hurled before. But this time, Kincade had had enough. As Taulbee turned to ascend the staircase, Kincaid reached for his pistol. The shot rang out, sharp and sudden, echoing through the grand halls of the Capitol. The bullet struck Taulbee near his left eye, the force knocking him down the steps. Blood pooled where he fell, and gasps spread through the onlookers like wildfire. Taulbee's imposing figure, which had once commanded rooms and cowed men, now lay crumpled on the cold marble, his fate hanging in the balance. It was a moment born of years of tension and resentment, leaving both men forever tied to a single act of violence that shocked the nation. For Taulbee, it was the tragic end of a rise to power. For Kincade, it was the culmination of fear and frustration, and the beginning of a trial that would captivate the country. A frantic rush followed as onlookers helped carry him to Providence Hospital, a place where hope and desperation often walked hand in hand. There, doctors worked tirelessly, doing all they could to save him. For 11 long days, Taulbee lingered in critical condition. His wound brought on severe swelling and infection, the kind that no medicine of the time could fully fight off. At first, there were whispers of hope. Perhaps the mountain Orator had one last fight in him. But as the days wore on, it became clear his strength was failing. On March 11, 1890, William Preston Taulbee drew his final breath, his life snuffed out by the bullet fired in a moment of fear and fury. Meanwhile, Charles E. Kincade wasted no time in surrendering himself to the authorities. Calmly and deliberately, he handed over his small .32 caliber pistol and claimed self-defense. The news of the shooting spread like wildfire, capturing the attention of the entire nation. In a time when political scandal was hardly a rarity, this act of violence stood out as both shocking and deeply personal. Public opinion split right down the middle. Taulbee's supporters, especially those from Kentucky, were quick to paint Kincade as a cold-blooded killer, a journalist who had ruined a man's career and then ended his life. But Kincaid's defenders told a different story, highlighting the years of bullying and humiliation he'd endured at the hands of a man twice his size. To them, Kincaid's act was one of desperation, a last-ditch effort to protect himself from a threat he could no longer bear. The case became a spectacle, a clash of narratives about power, pride, and fear. For Taulbee, it was the tragic end of a career that had once shone so bright. For Kincade, it was the start of a legal battle that would shape how history remembered them both. The halls of the Capitol, now stained by both blood and controversy, bore witness to the fallout of a feud that had spiraled tragically out of control. The trial of Charles E. Kincade began in April 1891, capturing national attention as one of the most sensational courtroom dramas of its time. The diminutive journalist, accused of killing the once powerful Congressman William Preston Taulbee, faced a jury that would have to untangle a story of power, pride, and fear. Representing Kincade was none other than Senator Daniel Voorhees, a prominent and skilled attorney whose reputation for eloquence earned him the nickname the Tall Sycamore of the Wabash. Voorhees painted a vivid picture of a man pushed to his limit. He argued that Kincade, physically slight and frail, had acted out a genuine fear for his life. The defense emphasized Taulbee's towering stature and history of intimidation, detailing incidents where the former congressman had publicly humiliated, bullied, and physically assaulted Kincade. Witnesses testified to seeing Taulbee grab Kincade by the ear, shove him against walls, and mock him in public. The defense framed the shooting not as murder, but as a desperate act of self-preservation by a man who believed he had no other way to protect himself. The prosecution, however, presented a starkly different narrative. They portrayed Kincade as a vindictive journalist who had harbored a grudge against Taulbee ever since his articles had contributed to the congressman's fall from grace. They suggested that Kincade, humiliated and angry, had planned the murder as a final act of revenge. Using the power of Taulbee's legacy as a respected figure in Kentucky, they sought to depict Kincade as cold-blooded and calculating. The trial stretched over weeks, with extensive testimony from witnesses on both sides. The courtroom was packed, and the public followed every detail with rapt attention, the case sparking heated debates across the nation. Ultimately, the jury weighed the years of tension, the dramatic circumstances of the Capitol encounter, and the testimonies of witnesses who confirmed Taulbee's aggressive behavior. When the verdict was finally delivered, Kincade was acquitted on the grounds of self-defense. Though legally sound, the decision was far from unanimous in the court of public opinion. For some, it was a triumph of justice for a man who had been pushed too far. For others, it was a miscarriage of justice, a bitter end to the life of a once great leader. The trial closed one chapter in the lives of both men, but the echoes of their tragic feud lingered, marking the Capitol stairs in American history with a tale of ambition, conflict, and the price of unchecked resentment. After the trial, Charles E. Kincaid returned to the profession that had once brought him respect and recognition: journalism. But the stain of the Capitol shooting and the trial's notoriety followed him wherever he went. Though acquitted, Kincade could not escape the shadow cast by the events that had unfolded. His work lacked the influence and reach it once had, and he never regained the prominence he'd enjoyed as a sharp-tongued political correspondent for the Louisville Times. Kincaid's health, already fragile before the shooting, continued to decline. The physical strain of the trial, coupled with the relentless public scrutiny and the weight of personal guilt, wore him down. He was described by those who knew him as a man haunted by what he had done, by what he had endured, and perhaps by the larger-than-life figure of Taulbee, whose legacy loomed large even in death. In 1906, at the age of 51, Charles E. Kincade passed away. His death marked the quiet end of a life that had been anything but. He left behind a legacy as complex as the events that defined it. A journalist whose sharp pen brought both accountability and controversy, and a man whose act of desperation in a moment of fear made him a central figure in one of the most infamous cases in Capitol history. While his story faded from the headlines, the echoes of that fateful February day linger, ensuring that his name remains forever tied to the tragedy that unfolded on the East Staircase. William Preston Taulbee was laid to rest in the family cemetery near Mount Sterling, Kentucky, not far from the rugged hills where his journey began. His burial was marked by a profound sense of loss, both for his family and for the Appalachian community he had dedicated his life to serving. Taulbee's death was more than a personal tragedy. It was a historical milestone, as it marked the first fatal shooting of a congressman within the halls of the U.S. Capitol. The East Staircase, where the confrontation unfolded, became an enduring symbol of the tragedy. According to accounts, bloodstains from the incident remained visible for years, a haunting reminder of the violence that shattered the dignity of those marble steps. The staircase, once a place of routine passage, transformed into a silent witness to one of the most shocking moments in Capitol history. To this day, the story of William Preston Taulbee lingers in the shadowed corners of the Capitol, a chilling echo of ambition, conflict, and the fatal cost of human frailty. Now that you've heard this tale of ambition, rivalry, and tragedy, We'd love to hear what's rattling round in your minds. Do you reckon Charles Kincade acted out of fear, protecting himself from a man who pushed him too far? Or do you think he let anger and vengeance get the better of him, taking a step he couldn't take back? And what about Taulbee? Was he a victim of his own pride and temper, or do you see him as a man unfairly dragged down by scandal and circumstance? How do you feel knowing this all unfolded right there in the halls of the U.S. Capitol, a place meant for justice and civility? Maybe you've got thoughts on how this story reflects the struggles of power and humanity we still see today. Whatever you're thinking, we want to hear it. Drop your comments below, share your ideas, your questions, or maybe even a tale of your own about rivalry and redemption. Don't be shy now. Let's keep this conversation going. Thanks for spending some time with us here at Kentucky Melody. If you enjoyed this dive into the life and legacy of William Preston Taulbee, be sure to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. It helps us keep bringing y'all the stories that make Kentucky's past come alive. And don't forget to check out our newest podcast playlist, Kentucky Time Capsule. We're digging deep into the history and untold tales of the bluegrass state, from political intrigue and legendary figures to the moments that shaped our culture. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a story, and join us next time as we open up another chapter of Kentucky's fascinating past. See y'all soon.